Hi, everybody. The topic of this presentation is to answer to a question on the feminism. Does feminism have an impact on urban architecture? In my PhD research, I am studying indeed a system to make a cartography of all the gender-focused projects on urban planning and seek for the feminist impact on these projects. And I am focused on France, Paris in particular, and Italy, and Bologna with a comparative study. But today, I will present you what it seems to me to be this impact in the temporary urban planning experiences. So I am going to jump abruptly and radically on all the definitions that should be clarified on gender, feminisms, and so on. We can discuss it later together. And I just say for now that I am speaking from an intersectional point of view. That is to say that I am interested in the multiple domination forms that occur among social and spatial relations. So I will not start talking about toilets. I rather prefer to take you to a journey on the French and Parisian mostly temporary urbanism projects. Because there are these new ways of doing a city planning, and there is a panel of urban actions and experiments which goes under the name of temporary, transitory city planning. It also includes tactical urbanism, micro-urbanism, urban acupuncture, etc. And I call it urban architecture. I call it urban architecture because I am referring to the eponymous Italian current in the 1960s, and I decided to define with umbrella word all these practices urban architecture because I am interested in the interaction of the Vitruvian trilogy and Firmitas, Utilitas, Venustas, and in particular the Venustas, because I am persuaded that the aesthetic is a fundamental part of the deconstruction of the heteropatriarchal gaze in our cities. In France, since the decentralization of the 80s, the resizing of the built space has been at work. The real estate prices are increasing, and this increases the need of social space. And on the other hand, the construction sites last in time, and it is kidnapping potential social space. So in this situation, in this crazy situation, the collaborative city is finding ground, is developing, and becoming more auspicious for an extended part of society. These three modalities of occupation can be identified in the transitional urban planning process. And in the Ile-de-France, since 1990s, more than 70 sites meeting these definitions and have been listed by the Ile-de-France Planning and Town Planning Institute. They have seen the emergence of these new practices, looking for the production of a non-standardized city, and they are based on invention through action, diversity, and programmatic adjustment, as well as on the presence of actors and in within the project, such as co-design. These approaches, we can see some examples that we are going to talk about this later. Paris Plage and Grands Voisins, and a range of more or less formal actions that brings together young architects, urbanists, and inhabitants. And as a researcher on the impact of feminism in urban planning, while preparing my thesis, I questioned myself about the revolution potential of these experiences. And I asked myself these questions. Among these experiences, what is, if there is, the feminist impact? So in a sense, I can say that this answer of Larry Branch and interview inspires me. What might be a difference about a feminist design versus a design that doesn't take feminism into account? Well, with my thesis, I advocate that when we look at a temporary urban installation, we are in the realm of a utopian society that builds itself on new basis of sharing and mutual support. And this realm is fairly suitable for testing gender equality and for all sorts of social activism, especially ecological and gender gaze are often brought together in these experiences. So I would like to separate four categories of experience that we are going to analyze together. Public, temporary urbanism, private temporary urbanism, gender-focused, and not gender-focused temporary urbanism. So I want to start with a gender-focused and public project, and is the project of the urban renewal of 7 Parisian squares, which took place from 2016 to 2018. And it is an example of a temporary urban planning experience with a proactive policy, that is to say, involving a clear focus on gender. It is a very specific project in which the city of Paris was experimenting temporary urbanism as a foreshadowing occupation. It was led by the Jean-Christophe Choblet, the same inventor of Paris Plage, and the gender focus was intended as a preliminary studies on site. The interpretation of each square differ a lot, and we will see some examples. We start with Place du Panthéon. In the square of Pantheon in Paris, the feminist design office Jean Ville was part of the project team from the beginning as the gender expert. These bring a lot of knowledge about how to focus on gender. The main action of this preliminary observation phase was quantitative observation, so to count, to observe position of women bodies in public spaces, and there were also a lot of several moments of activism that took place during the project. Sensitive walks, flash mobs, non-formal conferences, artistic intervention, etc. And one of those creative moments became a formal piece of artwork. It started in 2017 with a sensitive walk and a flash mob, and it ended in 2019 with a permanent engrave in wood of names of a pantheon of women. And as you may know, the French pantheon today has 5 women and 75 men. I will not talk about Place de la Nation or Place des Fêtes, even if they are really peculiar cases, but I will take the quite the opposite case, the Place de la Bastille. Place de la Bastille was a square. In the theme of this square was less focused on gender, and in 2017, I was preparing an artistic walk at a queer derive for a conference, and I decided to explore how gender analysis were handled in Place de la Bastille. There were several public boards that should have explained the social observations analysis phase with a diagnostic and a gendered map. Well, what to say, it was really a gender binary oriented analysis, merely focused on problems, women in core, and stereotypes such as the identification of women and mother and care. For instance, in this panel, you can see a black figure that we can think about a masculine figure, and all the other figures are masculine, are men, and the only woman is mother with carrying his child. So the stereotypes for this project team were the reality. Nowhere in this panel there was explained that the stereotypes is not the reality. And so a few weeks later, with a bunch of scholars and artists during this queer derive for this conference, we went to Bastille Square and we had our act of militant interaction, and we explained and correct all the gendered map with our suggestion to open in a non-stereotypized way this analysis. I want to remind you that this project was led by the municipality of Paris, and it was the same that Place du Panthéon, and the gender analysis was at the very beginning of the project, something that should have been studied. Well, was not this case. I continue with temporary urbanism that is public but not gender focused, and yet this project, even if they doesn't have an open or declared focus on gender, at the end the quality of the public space produced is gender sensitive because of the implication of the people and the architects and the scientific people were behind this project. So the Paris Plage, that is the occupation every summer of the river of Paris, the pedestrian plan, and the schoolyard that you know that the schoolyard is traditionally occupied by the football. So rethinking a design for the schoolyard is very important. We go to our last two temporary urbanism categories. We start with the Grands Voisins, which is a case of private and not gender-focused temporary urbanism, because they are the majority of case, and sometimes they are simply carefree of the gender implication spaces, and there is the majority of cases. But sometimes, even if they are not gender focused, there is a subconscious feminism. Somehow these places reveal an awareness on gender issues that is more and more widespread. In this case, Grands Voisins was an ancient hospital in the very city center of Paris, and it was a social urban temporary occupation from 2015 to 2020. And this special project creates a temporary incubator for artistic and crafts activities while hosting refugees and migrants people, and creates so a very special social mix. And probably is this social mix at the source of an opening in the feminist and militant point of view. And in this case, I start to speak about toilet because toilet is indeed one of the most central objects to make a difference in the gender perspective of public space, where to put it, how many, neutral or gendered, etc. We have to think all of these things because public space is to feel safe and comfortable in the public space is the first a step to make a women occupy public space. And speaking about toilets, the lockdown has showed how gender inequality in public space favors the absence of women, because toilets were closed at 10 o'clock while bars and cafes were still open, and they sell alcohol, but we cannot go to pee anywhere. And maybe we were drunk and we were obliged to pee in the street and in not very safe spaces. So in a certain sense, this situation make the public space after 10 p.m. In the summer in 2020 in Paris masculine and male space. I will finish with this example on temporary urbanism, which is private and gender focused, because is the occupation on the underneath of the highway in a peripheral area in the south of Paris, and this place is planned to be an artistic space with concerts, events, etc. And Ville, the office, I was working with them last year, and my role was to observe and to tell to the team that the project should be gender sensitive. So I had to say to the designer and to all the team if the choices were gender sensitive, approved by Jean. So you can imagine my shock when I see this plan for toilets. To explain me why they tell me that there is no money to think about other kind of toilets, and luckily we worked to another plan, but well, in conclusion, what we can say that this is not this is not a victory, because there is still a lot of conflicts even within the most innovative structure, because it would seem that it is difficult to dismantle privileges, and that's the problem. What I want to say to finish is that well, I would like to say a lot of other things. I can say then we can have a gender binary oriented approach. We start from the principle that the city is not sufficiently inclusive, and we focus on solutions for women without questioning too much what women means or represent in our society, like the case of Place de la Bastille. Or gender non-binary oriented, when the design is cradled in a worldview warned that gender binarism stems from an heterosis patriarchal social structure. Then we have a militant and conscious approach, but it takes different forms depending of feminisms and nuances that we don't have discussed yet. So, does feminism have an impact upon urban architecture? Frankly, I am fed up with this question, because yes, we know perfectly that feminism has an impact on all the built space, because it's based on social construction, ideological conviction, blah, blah, blah. We can have a speech. We have a lot of speech on this conference in these days, and it is very important, but we have to admit that we are not in the majority to think so, especially in the real estate world and in the mainstreaming or traditional urbanism. This is why it's still relevant or even urgent to continue to carry on to put together examples on how the vision of the world affects the built space, because the built space equals social space, and this question is theoretically reduced to a philosophical assumption, which doesn't need any further theoretical demonstration. It's true in itself, and it proves that any social disease is reflected also on site, in building space, in our city life. So racism, that's why we have racism, gender inequality, economic gap. Thank you very much, and goodbye.